This is the most balanced build in Diablo 4. It's good against multiple targets, it destroys single enemies, has an extremely high survivability, it's almost like a tank build, and it has no problems with energy management. And what's also important, you can start using this build from the lowest levels, despite the fact that it's a high level build. So anyway, in this build we're gonna be using two core skills at once. The first is Flurry, and this is our main skill for making damage against multiple opponents, and Rapid Fire for a single target damage to kill elites or bosses much faster. As a base skill we use Puncture, because Puncture and Flurry make a great combination. We make an enemy vulnerable with Puncture, then we use Flurry and it makes all enemies around vulnerable. Also Puncture makes enemies slow, lets us restore some energy, and what's really important, the Puncture is a marksman skill. And this means that we'll be able to take advantage of Trick of the Trade legendary node, which is one of the best legendary nodes in my opinion. Each time we will be casting Puncture, it will increase damage of our next Flurry by 25%. And by the way, when we cast Flurry, it will increase damage of our next Rapid Fire by 25%, and so on and so on. And now a few words about core skills. Flurry heals and deals damage, but in order to use it effectively, you definitely need to have these aspects, which makes Flurry do damage around you and also gives additional damage. And by the way, I suggest you to use this aspect on your main weapon. Next thing here is Rapid Fire. We use it mostly because it's basically a free skill with this improvement. Each time when you'll be hitting a vulnerable enemy, you will literally get all the energy back, and it also deals a lot of damage to single targets. Plus, further on higher levels, you might try to take these improvements to Flurry and Rapid Fire, and after each evade, you'll be stunning enemies with Flurry and dealing much more damage to them with Rapid Fire. I've been testing it and it works fine, but traditional improvements do make a much safer choice. And we are moving on, guys. The next skill that we use is Shadow Step. We use it not only as a gap closure, but also as a way to get unstoppable and to survive when we're stunned or crowd controlled. So we are taking improvement that decreases cooldown, but for easier fights you might take a greedy choice and pick stun instead. We also use Cold Imbuement in this build. It increases our survivability because frozen enemies do not attack us, and also we do more damage to frozen and chilled enemies, so against a little bit of extra damage. It's really useful against high level elites, especially if you fight like a few of them. Flurry does a great job when we need to apply imbuement, but it's also possible to chill and freeze enemies with the help of Rapid Fire. And finally, as our ultimate, we use Shadow Clones. It gives us extra damage, and also it's another way to become unstoppable. As for passives, now we use here actually pretty standard passives for the most rogue builds. It's Weapon Mastery, it's Exploit, and so on. And frankly speaking, I think that those are already very well explained, so I'm just moving forward here without getting into details on these passives. And by the way, if you want to see the whole build, you can find it in the pinned comment. And just reminding you, don't forget to take heal and evade. As for the key passive, here we have two options. For easier fights we can use close quarters combat, and since we're using both marksman and cutthroat skills all the time, we'll have additional attack speed and damage from it. But for tougher fights we will need extra survivability, so a good choice will be picking momentum. We will fight dazed and frozen enemies all the time, so we will easily get 3 stacks of momentum and additional damage reduction from it. And by the way, if we choose momentum, this aspect will be really helpful because it will give us the third way to heal ourselves. Now let's speak a little bit about must-have aspects. I've already mentioned these aspects for our main weapon. Next we want to have some damage reduction, and here are 3 good choices. Extra armor from making damage reduction after base attacks, and damage reduction from crowd-controlled enemies. You can place them on a chest, on helmet, or on an amulet. I also use these unique pants to get barrier each time that we are healing over 100% of our health, which will happen all the time because remember we have at least 2 sources of a heal. And guys, if you haven't found those pants yet, no worries, it's no big deal. In this situation I would suggest you that you replace those pants with an aspect that grants you damage reduction against crowd controlled enemies. It will also do, but since I do have those pants and use those, I also use these in other aspects aspect with a related effect. It's for additional damage when the barrier is active, and the barrier will be active like all the time. And yeah, it will be cool if you find bracers that give plus levels of flurry and rapid fire at the same time. On boots, I have a pretty nice aspect for almost every build, which dazes vulnerable enemies. And remember, dazed enemies are not attacking you, nor they are using any abilities, they are just standing still. Plus, with the help of this passive, we'll be knocking down such enemies all the time. Since we use combo points, I think this unique dagger is a must-have, because it not only gives us extra damage when we spend 3 combo points, but also has a chance to receive 3 combo points immediately. I also have this aspect to increase core skill damage, and this one for extra attack speed. Now, about the energy management. This aspect is extremely good. We receive energy each time we crowd control an enemy, and it happens a lot when we puncture or use cold imbuement. Even when we daze enemies, it will give us extra energy. Also remember, since the rapid fire is free, we don't have any problems with energy in this build. Now let's take a look at important Paragon nodes. We already talked about Tricks of the Trade legendary node, and the second one that we use here is No Witnesses, which not only increases damage of our shadow clone, but also grants us a 10% damage bonus for 20 seconds after casting an ultimate. Now, as for important glyphs, those are Chip to have extra physical damage, Control for damage versus crowd controlled and especially a lot of damage versus chilled or frozen, Exploit, which is always good for even more vulnerable damage and an extra way to make enemies vulnerable. I have already shared my thoughts about these specific glyph in several videos, and my opinion remains the same. It is a must-have for pretty much any build, no matter ranged or melee. Then here I also use Combat for more damage with core skill, and it also provides us some additional energy because with each critical strike we restore some of the energy cost. So guys, as you see, this build is really easy. We get combo points with Puncture and just destroy enemies with Flurry. During some tougher fights we use Cold Imbuement to freeze enemies, and when we kill all weaker mobs, if the elite is still alive, we use Rapid Fire. We also actually have really high survivability, since we have a lot of heal, barrier and a lot of ways to stop enemies from attacking us. But still, in really high level nightmare dungeons you will need to pay attention to not get one shot, because anyway it's a melee build. And if you're looking for a really good ranged build, go ahead and take a look at the build that you can now see on your screen. And hey guys, don't forget that the link to a complete build with all the aspects and all the skills and the main Paragon that I'm choosing you can find in the pinned comment. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you for your attention. Bye bye.